Eliza Marin had imagined this morning 1,000 times. The smell of candle wax and cedar, the scratch of her mother's lace veil against her collarbone, the particular hush that falls over a church when something holy is about to happen. She had imagined Denton's face when he turned and saw her coming down the aisle, the softening around his eyes, the way a man looks at a woman when he finally understands what he has been given. She had imagined all of it so precisely, so faithfully, that standing here now in the doorway of First Baptist of Sweetwater, Texas, with 53 pairs of eyes fixed on her back and not a single one belonging to her groom, felt less like abandonment and more like a language she had never been taught suddenly becoming the only language spoken. The pews were full. Reverend Doyle stood at the pulpit with his hands folded and his face arranged into an expression that was trying very hard to be neutral. The flowers on the altar, white larkspur, her choice, had already begun to droop in the July heat. The church doors stood open behind her because the morning was supposed to be a celebration, and celebrations needed air. And now the air coming through those doors carried dust and the sound of someone's horse stamping impatiently at the hitching post outside, and that was all. Eliza stood still for 11 seconds. She counted them. Then she lifted her chin, squared her shoulders inside the ivory dress her aunt had sewn by lamplight for 3 consecutive winters, and walked back down the aisle she had not yet walked down, through the murmuring congregation, through the open doors, and out into the blinding white light of a Texas morning that did not care, not even slightly, what had just happened to her. The dust hit her first, then the heat, then the full weight of where she was and what she had and what she did not have. She had $4.30 in a drawstring pouch tucked into her corset. She had the clothes on her body. She had a carpet bag at the Hensley boarding house containing 2 dresses, a hairbrush, her father's compass, and a water-stained copy of Wuthering Heights that she had read so many times the spine had given up entirely. She did not have a groom. She did not have a plan. She walked to the edge of the church steps and stood there with her hands folded in front of her and her face arranged into something that was not crying, because crying required an audience, and she had already given this town enough to discuss over supper, and she was not going to give them tears on top of it. She heard footsteps behind her, heavy ones, boot heels on the wooden steps. She did not turn around. She was fairly certain she could not survive one more person looking at her with that particular brand of pity that Sweetwater specialized in, the kind wrapped in scripture and administered with a casserole. The footsteps stopped beside her. A man, tall from the shadow he threw. He smelled like horses and dust and something faintly metallic, like he had been working with iron before he put on whatever passed for his good shirt. She still did not look at him. "Word is," he said. Briggs rode out at first light. His voice was low and unhurried, the kind of voice that had learned economy the hard way, that did not spend words it did not have. "I know," she said. "Ruth Paulson's place, over in Keller County. I know that too." A pause. The horse at the hitching post stamped again. Somewhere inside the church she could hear Reverend Doyle saying something to the congregation in his pastoral management voice, the one he used when things needed to be gently redirected. "I have got a ranch," the man said, "east side of town, about 4 miles out, Hargrove operation." She finally looked at him. He was not looking at her. He was looking at the street, at the dust and the storefronts, and the shimmering heat rising off the hardpack in visible waves. He was perhaps 34, with a face that had been outdoors for all 34 of those years and showed the arithmetic plainly, creased around the eyes, jaw set like something carved, a scar along the left side of his chin that had healed white and clean. He had the hands of a man who had not stopped working since he was old enough to be useful. "I have heard of it," she said, because she had. Everyone in Sweetwater had heard of the Hargrove operation, heard it was struggling, heard Cole Hargrove had lost 2 ranch hands to the silver mines up north and 3 head of cattle to something that might have been drought and might have been worse. "I need someone who can work," he said. "Not cook and clean, though May handles most of that anyway. I mean real work, fence line, cattle management, supply tracking. I lost my last hand in March and I cannot afford to hire a replacement who needs 6 months of breaking in." He still had not looked at her directly. He was making this very easy to refuse, she realized. He was constructing the offer in a way that had no softness in it, no charity, nothing that would require her to feel grateful or indebted or saved. It was a transaction, clean as a land deed. "You are offering me employment," she said. "I'm offering you room, board, and fair wages for work rendered. You would have your own quarters in the East Wing, May's old rooms. She moved to the main house 2 years ago when her hip went. It is private. You do not know if I can do any of the things you just listed." "I watched you manage the Hensley supply order last October," he said. "You caught a billing error on 60 pounds of flour before Hensley even noticed it. And Reverend Doyle says you helped your father run a cattle operation up in the Panhandle before he passed." She stared at him. He had done the arithmetic before he came down these steps. He had already decided, and he was presenting the offer like it was spontaneous, because he understood that a woman standing at the wreckage of her wedding did not need to feel managed. Cole Hargrove, she thought, was more careful than he looked. "What are the terms?" she asked. He named a figure. It was fair. More than fair, actually. It was the kind of wage that acknowledged the work without making an event of her situation. She stood there in her wedding dress in the dust of Sweetwater's main street and considered the $4.30 in her corset and the carpet bag at the boarding house and the compass her father had carried through 30 years of difficult country. "I will need to change first," she said. He nodded, already turning toward his horse. "I will be at the livery," he said. "Take your time." He walked away without looking back, which was either very rude or very respectful, and she stood there for a moment trying to determine which it was before deciding it did not matter. She had somewhere to be. The road to Hargrove Ranch was 4 miles of silence, broken only by the creak of the wagon and the rhythmic percussion of the horse's hooves on the hardpack, and occasionally the distant lowing of cattle somewhere beyond the scrub. Cole Hargrove drove without speaking. Eliza sat beside him with her carpetbag between her feet and her wedding dress folded in her lap. She had not wanted to leave it at the boarding house, some stubborn instinct of possession, though she could not have said what she intended to do with it, and watched the country change as they moved east out of town. Sweetwater itself was a collection of ambitions in various states of completion: the hotel that had been under construction for 3 years, the Mercantile with its ambitious painted sign, the courthouse that was the most finished building in the county because the county had paid for it directly and therefore actually cared whether it stood. But east of town, the land stopped pretending. It became itself, flat in some stretches and then abruptly not flat, cut through with dry creek beds and rocky outcroppings and long expanses of pale grass that had given up on being green sometime around May and would not consider it again until October, if they were lucky. The sky was enormous. It was always enormous out here, but away from the town's buildings it became aggressive about it, a blue so absolute and so high that looking at it directly felt like a kind of argument. "How long has the ranch been in your family?" she asked, mostly because silence had texture out here, and this particular texture was becoming uncomfortable. "My father built the main house in 51, Cole said. "I took over in 78 when he died. You were managing it alone since 78. May helps." "That's not what I asked." He glanced at her sideways. It was the first time he had actually looked at her since the church steps, and she registered the assessment in it, not unkind but evaluating, the way a man looks at something he is trying to determine the load-bearing capacity of. "Mostly alone," he said. "The Delgado brothers helped through 79 and 80. Good hands. Then the Comstock strike happened and I lost both of them inside of a month." "Silver fever," she said. "Same thing took 3 men from my father's operation. There's no arguing with it." "No," he agreed, and something in his voice settled slightly, like a door closing a fraction more gently than expected. They rode in silence for another mile. Then the ranch appeared. First the fence line, which was in better repair than she had expected given what she had heard, and then the outbuildings, a barn and 2 smaller structures she could not identify at this distance, and then the main house, which was large and plain, and looked like it had been built by someone who believed in walls and roofs and distrusted ornamentation on principle. It needed paint. The yard needed work. There was a water trough near the barn that had developed a lean, but the bones were good. She could see that even from a distance, the kind of solid, deliberate construction that was meant to last through weather and time and the general indifference of the country to human plans. May Hargrove was on the porch when they pulled up. She was 71 years old and had the posture of a woman who had decided decades ago that gravity was a suggestion and was still in the process of proving her point. She was small and white-haired and brown as leather, and she watched Eliza climb down from the wagon with an expression that was neither suspicious nor welcoming, but deeply, professionally curious, the way a person looks at something they have decided to reserve judgment on until the evidence is in. "This is Eliza Marin," Cole said, climbing down on the other side. "She will be working the ranch, East Wing rooms." "I know who she is," May said. "Whole town knows who she is by now." She looked at Eliza directly. "That was a rotten thing that happened to you this morning." "Yes," Eliza said. "It was." "Well," May said, and the word contained an entire paragraph of practical philosophy. "Come inside and eat something. Cole has not let you eat, I would guess, because he does not think of it when he has got logistics in his head." "I am standing right here, May," Cole said. "I know where you are standing," May said, and went inside. Eliza looked at Cole. Cole looked at the middle distance. "She is like that," he said. "Always. Since I was 4 years old." He picked up her carpet bag before she could reach for it and carried it toward the east door without being asked and without making anything of it, and Eliza followed him into the house that smelled like wood smoke and dried herbs and something baking, and tried to remember the last time she had been somewhere that felt, even faintly, like it might hold. The first week was a negotiation of space and competence. Cole Hargrove's ranch operated on a logic that was entirely his own, specific, efficient, and completely undocumented, existing only in the habits of a single man who had developed those habits alone and therefore had no instinct for explaining them. Eliza spent the first 2 days simply watching. Not passive watching, she was not capable of passive watching, but the deliberate, systematic observation of someone learning the grammar of a new language by immersion. She mapped the ranch in her head, the grazing rotation, the water access points, which sections of fence were critical and which were mostly ceremonial, where the cattle bunched when the wind came from the south, how Cole moved through the day in a sequence that was so practiced it had become invisible to him. On the third morning she asked him for the supply ledger. He looked at her for a moment, that same load-bearing assessment, then handed it over without comment. She spent 2 hours with it at the kitchen table while May moved around her and made occasional small sounds of approval that she did not acknowledge directly. The ledger was meticulous in some areas and chaotic in others, the record of a man who tracked what mattered to him and trusted his memory for the rest. She found 3 accounting errors and a recurring overcharge from the Sweetwater Mercantile on salt block deliveries that had been going on for 14 months. She wrote up her findings on a piece of paper and left it on Cole's work table in the barn without comment. He came to supper that night and ate in silence for 5 minutes, and then said, without preamble, "The salt block thing. You are sure?" "I checked it 3 times, she said. "The original contract is in the back of the ledger. They have been billing you for 40-pound blocks on a 35-pound contract." He was quiet for another moment. 14 months, he said. 14 months, she confirmed. He looked at his plate. Something moved in his jaw. "I will ride in tomorrow," he said. May, at the other end of the table, made the small sound again. Cole and Eliza both ignored it. The days developed a rhythm that was not comfortable exactly. Comfort implied softness, and there was nothing soft about the Hargrove Ranch in August when the drought was operating at full conviction and the cattle needed moving to the northern pasture, and the windmill required rebuilding, and there was fence to mend along the eastern line where something, probably a dry lightning strike, had burned through 2 posts and 30 feet of wire. But the rhythm was real. She rose before the sun because the ranch required it, and she worked through the heat of the day because the ranch required that too, and she was good at it, better than Cole had expected. She could tell from the slight recalibration that happened around the 4th day, the way he stopped explaining things twice and started simply saying them once and trusting that she had heard. He did not compliment her work. He noted it, which was different. When she correctly identified a lame steer's injury as a stone bruise rather than a tendon problem, a distinction that mattered significantly in terms of treatment and recovery time, he said, And then, after a pause, "Your father teach you that?" "Yes," she said. "Mine too," he said, and went back to work. She thought about that for the rest of the afternoon, the way he had offered that. Quietly, without ceremony, like a man sliding something across a table and waiting to see if it would be accepted. The evenings were the hardest part. Not because of anything that happened in them. May cooked and they ate, and Cole did the account books, and Eliza read or helped May with the mending, but because of their specific quality of ordinary. It was too easy to sit in that kitchen with the lamp burning and the night pressing against the windows and May's needles clicking and Cole's pen scratching across the ledger paper. Too easy to let the evening feel like something it was not authorized to feel like. She would remember at those moments standing at the altar. The particular quality of that silence when the congregation understood, before she did, that no one was coming. She would use that memory like a hand on a hot stove, brief and corrective. She was here to work. She was here because she had $4.30 and a compass and nowhere else to be. She was not here because of the way Cole Hargrove said, when she did something right, or the way he had carried her carpet bag without making an event of it, or the way May looked at the two of them across the supper table with that professionally neutral expression that was not neutral at all. She was not here for any of that. The cattle trouble started on a Tuesday. There had been signs, she had noticed them 2 days before, and logged them in the back of the supply ledger where she had begun keeping her own notations, the way the herd was pressing toward the higher ground on the northern pasture, the quality of the sky on Monday evening, a yellowish heaviness at the horizon that she associated, from her childhood in the Panhandle, with weather building in ways it did not intend to announce. She said nothing to Cole. She told herself this was because she was still new here, and still earning whatever credibility she had, that it would be presumptuous to predict weather to a man who had been reading this particular sky for 6 years. She told herself she would mention it in the morning. The rain started at 3 in the morning and did not stop. By 5 it was not rain but something more absolute. The sky unloading a conviction it had been building for weeks, water sheeting off the barn roof and turning the yard into a shallow lake and the creek bed to the east, which had been so dry she had walked its bottom on her second day, running suddenly and terribly full. Cole was already in the barn when she pulled on her boots. She could see his lantern through the gaps in the siding. She pulled her coat on over her nightgown, there was no time for more than that, and went out into it. The water was ankle-deep in the yard. The sound was enormous, rain and thunder, and somewhere in the distance, the panicked voices of cattle. "Eastern fence line," Cole said when she came through the barn door. He was already saddling his horse, his movements tight and controlled, the efficiency of a man managing urgency without letting it manage him. "The creek is going to take it out if it has not already. I need to get the herd moved before they scatter through the gap." "How many hands do we have?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Just us," he said. "May cannot ride." She was already moving toward the second horse, the roan. 17 hands, temperamental in good weather and a genuine argument in bad. She had been working with him for 3 days and had developed something that was not yet trust but was a working arrangement. Cole looked at her. "That horse does not like storms," he said. "He does not like me either," she said, "but we have an understanding." She could tell he wanted to say something else. She could also tell he understood there was no time for it. He handed her the bit without further comment. They rode out into the dark and the rain. The eastern fence line was gone, not damaged, gone. The creek had come over its banks with a violence that the fence had not stood a chance against, and 30 head of cattle had found the gap with the unerring instinct of cattle for finding the one place they should not be. They were scattered across the eastern flat in the dark and the rain, moving in the random panicked geometry of animals who have lost the logic of the herd. She could hear them more than see them. Cole was already angling north to cut off the drift, his horse eating ground with the focused efficiency of an animal who trusted its rider. She went the other way. She had seen the lead steer on her 3rd day at the ranch, a massive pale Hereford with one broken horn, the kind of animal whose primary social function within the herd was being the thing everyone else watched for cues about what to think. Her father had taught her this when she was 9 years old, in the matter-of-fact way he taught her everything: find the lead animal, and the rest will follow what the lead animal does. Control 1, control 30. She found him at the southeastern edge of the flat, standing at the boundary of a dry wash that was no longer dry, the water rushing past his hooves while he stood motionless with the particular bovine confusion of an animal whose world has recently stopped making sense. She brought the roan up on his left, the non-dominant side, deliberate, a pressure without aggression, and clicked her tongue in the low rhythmic pattern her father had used, a sound she had not made in 3 years and that came back to her hands and throat with the total uncanny recall of things learned young. The steer turned, slowly, reluctantly. But he turned. She kept the pressure steady and the rhythm consistent and walked him north, and behind him, because the herd logic was unbroken, the 30 head began to move. Cole found her 40 minutes later at the northern fence line. She was still in the saddle. The roan was blowing hard, and so was she, rain soaked to her skin and shaking in a way she was trying to stop but could not quite manage, her hands white-knuckled on the reins, the roan shifting under her with exhausted irritation. The cattle were in the northern pasture, all 30 of them, approximately, though she had not counted and was not going to right now. The gate was closed. She had done that too. Cole pulled his horse up beside her and looked at the herd, and then at her. He did not say anything for what felt like a very long time. Water was running off the brim of his hat in a continuous small stream. She was aware that she was wearing her coat over her nightgown, and that her hair had come entirely down, and that she looked, by any reasonable measure, like something the flood had carried in. "The lead steer," she finally said, because the silence was getting heavy. "Hereford with the broken horn." "Boss," Cole said. "That is what I call him. He was at the wash edge. I brought him north and the others followed." Cole looked at the pasture again. Then he looked at her. His face in the rain and the dark was difficult to read. It was always difficult to read, but something was different about the set of it, something around the eyes that she could not name and chose not to try. "You went out ahead of me," he said. "You were saddling when I got to the barn," she said. "You would have lost 20 minutes going back for a second horse." He was quiet for another moment. "Your father," he said. "Panhandle operation." 15 years, she said. "I learned before I learned to read." He looked at her one more time in that way that was not quite the load-bearing assessment anymore, that was something she did not have a word for yet. And then he said, quietly, "Eliza." Her name. Not Miss Marin, which was what he had called her for the 10 days she had been on his ranch. Eliza. Just that. He turned his horse toward the barn, and she followed, and neither of them said anything else, and the rain began, almost imperceptibly, to ease. May had a fire going when they came in. She had hot coffee and dry blankets and the particular aura of a woman who had known the night was going to go this way and had prepared accordingly. And she did not say anything when Eliza came through the door, soaked and shaking, except to hand her the blanket first and the coffee second and guide her to the chair nearest the fire, as if this were the most natural sequence of events in the world. Cole stripped off his coat and hung it by the door. He poured his own coffee and stood at the fire and stared at the floor for a long moment. And Eliza watched him from the chair and thought that this was what exhaustion looked like on a person who was not accustomed to showing it. This stillness that was too complete, too deliberate, the stillness of a man exerting control over what his body wanted to do. May moved between them with the efficiency of long practice, refilling cups and stoking the fire and making the room warmer and brighter without appearing to try. The lamplight was amber on the stone floor, and Eliza's hands had finally stopped shaking, and the coffee was strong enough to be rude about it, and outside the rain was pulling back, withdrawing, its business apparently finished. 30 head, Eliza said. "I did not count Boss." "He is fine," Cole said. "Found him at the gate when I came through." He looked up from the floor. The firelight caught the scar along his jaw in a way that made it more visible, a white line in the amber, a record of something that had happened and healed. "The fence line is gone," he said. "I know," she said. "I can help rebuild it. That is 2 days of work minimum." "Then it is 2 days." He held her gaze for a moment. Then he sat down in the chair across from her on the other side of the fire and leaned forward with his elbows on his knees and his cup between his hands. And they sat like that for a while in the warmth and the quiet, and May found reasons to move around the kitchen that kept her in the room but not quite between them. And outside the last of the rain let go of the roof and fell to the ground and was absorbed and was gone. She thought about her name in his mouth, the way he had said it on the northern fence line, in the dark and the rain, like a fact he had arrived at. Not a courtesy, not a softening, a fact. The way you say a word when you have been avoiding it and can no longer find a reason to. She pressed the coffee cup between her palms and looked at the fire, and did not think about Denton Briggs, who had ridden out at dawn with a widow from Keller County and left her standing in white larkspur and 3 winters of her aunt's work. She was very deliberate about not thinking about him. She almost managed it. She had been on Hargrove Ranch for 23 days when Denton came back. She was at the fence line, the eastern section, the rebuilt stretch, still raw in its newness, the posts pale against the older weathered wood on either side, checking the tension on the wire with her gloves off so she could feel it properly, which was something her father had taught her, and which she had done without thinking, and which had left her hands bleeding slightly at the knuckle when the wire slipped. She heard the horse before she saw the rider. Then she saw the rider and stood very still for 3 seconds with the wire in her hands and the blood on her knuckles and the flat Texas sky above her, and she felt something happen in her chest that she identified, with some surprise, as primarily anger rather than grief. Denton Briggs looked exactly the same as he always had. This was, somehow, the most offensive thing about him. He was handsome in a way that required maintenance and received it, clean-shaved, well-dressed, his horse brushed and current. He looked like a man who had done something uncomplicated and was prepared to explain it reasonably. He pulled up 10 yards away and looked at her across the fence line and said, "Eliza." "Don't," she said. He stopped. He reset visibly. He had always been good at reading a room. It was, she supposed, what had made him charming. The same skill that let him calibrate warmth could also calibrate retreat. "I wanted to explain," he said. "I do not need an explanation. Ruth and I, Denton." Her voice was even. She had not planned for it to be even, she had imagined, in the dark nights of her first week here, that if she ever saw him again, she would be loud and certain and specific in her recriminations. But the evenness was real. It came from somewhere she had not known she had. "I do not need you to tell me about Ruth. I do not need you to explain yourself to me. I have work to do." He looked at the fence, at the post-hole digger leaning against the new wood, at her hands with their split knuckles. Something moved across his face that she thought might be genuine, might be real, not the performed remorse she had expected, but something more complicated, a man looking at a version of a future he had walked away from and performing some private accounting. "You are working here," he said. "Yes." Cole Hargrove's operation. "Yes." "Eliza." His voice had changed. She recognized the change. It was the voice he used when he was trying to mean something. "You could come back. We could work it out. What happened with Ruth?" "That is, done," she said. "Denton?" "It is done." She turned back to the fence. She heard him sit still on his horse for a long moment, the animal shifting under him, and then she heard the hooves on the hardpack as he turned and rode. She did not watch him go. She put her hands back on the wire and worked, and the blood from her knuckles smeared against the metal and dried in the heat, and she was still at it 20 minutes later when she heard a second horse and looked up and found Cole 6 yards away on the gray, watching the direction Denton had ridden. He looked at her, at her hands. His jaw went to iron. "He give you trouble," he said. "No," she said. "You sure?" "I handled it." He looked at her for another moment. Then he dismounted and tied the gray and came to the fence without being invited and picked up the other end of the wire, and they worked together in silence, and he did not leave until the section was done. May came to her room that night. Eliza was reading by the lamp, or holding the book open by the lamp, which was not quite the same thing. May sat on the edge of the wooden chair in the corner without being invited, which was consistent with everything Eliza had observed about May's general approach to other people's spaces. "Cole saw him ride up," May said. "He came out to the eastern line after." "I know," Eliza said. "He did not need to. He knows that." May folded her hands in her lap. Her hands were old and very capable, the hands of a woman who had made things and repaired things and held things together for a long time. "Cole is not a man who does things he does not need to do," she said. "That is a careful way of putting it." "He is a careful man," May said. "Has been since his wife died." Eliza looked up from the book. She had not known there was a wife. She had not asked. It had not been her business, and she had been scrupulous about not making things her business that were not hers. But the information settled into the room now like a change in pressure, reordering what she understood. 7 years ago, May said. Fever. They had only been married 2 years. She paused. He built this ranch for her, or he told himself it was for her. I think he built it because he needed something to be building. But she was the reason, he said out loud. Eliza was quiet. I am telling you because you should know, May said. Not because it changes what you need to decide, but you should know. She stood up. She moved to the door with the deliberate authority of a woman who has said the thing she came to say. Then she stopped. He is a good man, she said, the kind that does not know how to say what he is carrying. But if you watch his hands, you can always tell. She went out. Eliza sat in the lamplight for a long time with the book face down in her lap and thought about a man building a ranch for a dead woman and running it alone for 5 years and walking down the steps of a church in July to offer a job to a woman he had seen catch a billing error on 60 pounds of flour. She thought about her name in his mouth. She thought about the wire at the eastern fence line, the two of them working the section to its close in the late afternoon heat. She thought about what it would mean to want to stay somewhere. Not to need to stay, not to have no alternative, but to want to, the terrifying and specific wanting of a woman who had arrived somewhere by accident and found, against all reasonable expectation, that it fit. She blew out the lamp. She lay in the dark and listened to the ranch settle around her, the sounds of wood and wind and the distant movement of cattle and, faintly, from somewhere in the main house, the sound of Cole's boots crossing the floor of his study, back and forth, the way a man walks when he is thinking about something he cannot resolve by working. The morning came in clear and specific. The drought had broken, at least partially. The creek was running again, a thin and tentative trickle that was not the violence of the flood, but something more sustainable, something that intended to continue. The pasture grass had answered the rain in the way grass always does, overnight and without ceremony, going from exhausted to insistent in the space of 48 hours. Eliza was at the barn before Cole. She had Cole's horse saddled, the gray, not the roan, and was working on the bridle when she heard him come in. He stopped inside the door, looked at the horse, looked at her. Thank you, he said. Thank. She handed him the reins. Their hands were close on the leather, close enough that she was aware of it, that specific awareness of proximity that arrives before the body acknowledges it to the mind. He did not take the reins immediately. He stood there for a moment with his hand near hers on the leather and looked at her with the expression she still did not have a word for, the one that had arrived on the northern fence line in the rain and had not entirely left. I need to ride the western pasture, he said. Check on the herd after the flood. Count head. I know, she said. I was going to come with you. I know that too, he said, and something shifted in the set of his face, something that in a less guarded man she would have recognized immediately. He took the reins. Their hands brushed on the leather, brief, accidental, or nearly accidental, and she felt it in a way that was not accidental at all, a particular warmth that had nothing to do with the morning sun now coming through the barn door in long horizontal bars. She went to saddle the roan. He did not say anything else, and she did not say anything else, and they rode out into the morning together, the two of them and the 2 horses in the wide country opening ahead of them, pale gold in the early light, the grass bending and recovering in the breeze with the patient, repetitive optimism of things that have survived difficult weather and are not ready to stop. The western pasture was whole. The herd was whole. She counted alongside Cole, a process that was systematic and quiet, and required attention, and which she applied herself to with the particular focus she brought to work that mattered, and the count came out clean, all head accounted for. The flood of disruption survived without permanent loss. They sat on their horses at the western edge of the pasture and looked at the cattle and the grass and the morning, and the sun was getting serious now, burning off the last of the night's cool with the efficient Texas conviction that seasons and time of day were not suggestions. 43 head, she said. 43, he confirmed. He turned his horse slightly so he was facing her at an angle rather than the horizon. She felt the shift before she looked at him. Eliza. Her name again. The fact again. She looked at him. His face was open in a way she had not seen it open, not performing openness, not making a gesture of it, but actually open, the careful construction of the guarded man temporarily set aside in the morning light. He was not comfortable with it. She could see that plainly, the slight tension in the jaw that was costing him something, the deliberate quality of his stillness. "You do not have to stay past the terms we agreed on," he said. "I know that. But I want to say—" He stopped. Started again. "The ranch is better since you came." She waited. He worked his jaw for a moment. "I am better since you came," he said, "not just the ranch." The words were plain and unhurried, the words of a man who has stripped the sentence down to what it actually means and is delivering it that way, without ornament, without the protection of indirection. She looked at him in the morning light with the cattle moving behind him, and the grass and the wide sky and the thin new trickle of the creek catching the sun somewhere to the east, and she felt the terrible and specific wanting again. Not the desperate wanting of a woman with nowhere to go, but the clear and grounded wanting of a woman who has been somewhere for 23 days and found that it has become the first honest place she has ever known. She thought about Denton. She thought about 3 winters of her aunt's needlework and white larkspur drooping in July heat and a congregation full of people watching her lift her chin. She thought about what her father had told her once, near the end, when she had asked him how you know when something is real. "You know," he had said, "when you are not performing anything, when you are just standing there." She was standing there. "Cole," she said. He looked at her. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. He was quiet for a long moment. Then the tension left his jaw. Not dramatically, it was not a dramatic man's jaw, but it left, and something in his face settled into a stillness that was different from the controlled stillness she had watched him maintain for 23 days. This was rest. Actual rest. The sun was full now over the pasture, the light flat and warm and thorough, the kind of light that makes the ordinary details of things, grass, fence posts, the ears of horses, the dust on a man's coat, visible in their full particularity, their realness. She turned her horse back toward the ranch. He turned his alongside her. They rode home in the morning, side by side, through the country that was already beginning to remember what green meant, and neither of them said anything else, and the silence between them was not the silence of absence, but of something arrived at, something settled, the particular quiet of 2 people who have stopped performing their distance and are simply, finally, here.